Hi everyone, welcome back to A Creatively Crafted Life. This is Melanie, and today we are doing another card by number. This is where I walk you through step by step, taking a basic card and stepping it up to something a little bit more fancy, if you will. And this time we're going to step it up so we end up with 4 cards. In addition, we're going to be playing with aqua shimmer powders. A lot of fun. Let's go.
Okay, so step 1, same step for all 4 cards. You're going to need some watercolor cardstock. I'm using Canon XL. It's not the most high quality. It's up to you what you want to use. Just realize, of course, you get different results with different paper. That goes the same with any type of watercoloring that you may do. I'm going to be using the Nuvo Shimmer powders. These are a watercolor powder similar to Brusho or Tim Oliver's Color Burst, and I think Lindy's Gang has some magical shakers that are also the same. I have Green Parade, Atlantis Burst, Violet Brocade, Catherine Wheel, Blue Blitz, and Cherry Bomb. You're also going to need a sprayer and some washi or some painter's tape to tack down your cardstock. I'm going to apply the powders to a full sheet of cardstock. Obviously, I am going to cut this down to use for my cards. I prefer to do it on a full sheet as opposed to individual rectangles, just so that I can pick and choose what I want. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to tack down the corners. You can get all fancy and tack down the entire perimeter, but I just find that it's easier just to do the corners, and I'm lazy. If you have a cutting board or some sort of board that you can tape this down to so that you can move it off your desk, that would be a great idea, because this is going to have some dry time. So I like to kind of do this the night before, and then the next day I come back and make the cards. So for this particular card, or this particular set of cards, I'm going to use Green Parade and Atlantis Burst. So one's like an aqua and one is more greenish. So I think the two will blend well. You could throw in any of the other colors. The thing to keep in mind is that these powders are made up of individual pigments. So to get this shade of green, it may be some particles are yellow, some particles are blue, and so you don't always know what you're going to get and how they may react. If you know color theory at all, you know that sometimes two colors combine together and they make mud or brown or something to that effect. I like to keep with colors that I know will mix well, hopefully. We'll see how this goes. There are two ways, well, there's more than 2 ways that you can use these powders, but there are 2 basic ways that you can, and one is by applying the powders directly to the paper when it's dry, and then the other is to apply it directly to the paper when it is wet. We're going to start off with dry, and of course we're going to add water, and then we'll add more powders when it's wet. So we're actually going to use both methods so you can see the difference of how that works. So the thing to keep in mind is this powder is super, super fine. If you squeeze this, it will go poof and you will get blobs of it everywhere, and a little goes a very, very long way. I like to kind of just not really shake it like a salt shaker, but more like kind of do a tapping motion, if you will. And you may not even see anything come out sometimes, but that doesn't mean that it's not there. It's just, like I said, it's just so super fine. Like I can see it, you won't be able to see that there's stuff coming out. The real magic, of course, happens when you apply water. So that was Atlantis Burst. And I'm going to just leave it at that so you can see what it does before I add the other color in. I'm going to lightly mist. So I'm just spraying from high up. So you can see this has some green particles and some turquoise to make up this particular color. Pretty cool, huh? Obviously, the more water you get, the more mixing that ends up happening and blending, and then the color will move a little bit. Now, as I said, I only take the corners, so the paper is bowing slightly, and I'm okay with that because I don't mind having some movement. Okay, let's add the green. This is Green Parade. Now this is wet, right? Not soaking wet, but it is wet. So when this hits wet, it already starts to break down. And spread out, which is so cool. Another thing that you're going to need that I didn't talk about is a paper towel. So you will find that the water will pool along the edges and stuff, and you'll probably want to clean that up periodically. So now I'm just going to keep going back in here, adding color and water until I am happy with the results. Now I don't like it when it's completely covered in color. I like having some white still show through, but it's completely up to you what you find visually appealing. So I just encourage you to go for it. And no two pieces are ever going to look exactly alike. Sometimes if you get a high concentration of powder and you don't want to keep spraying a lot of water on it, I will go just really close to it and just give it a good zap. You lose some of that webbing, but it does break up the color. And then I will also go in here a little bit and disturb it with my fingers just to break it up a little bit. So this is what I was telling you about the pooling. You're going to get some of that down here. And I just take a paper towel, or if you have a cloth or something that you use for crafting, you can just mop that up. Also, if you don't like with what's happening on the paper, for instance, if you think this color here is looking a little bit too dark, you can just kind of go in and mop that up as well. Oh, and if precision is your thing, this is not your this is not your medium, that's for sure. Okay, I think I like how that's looking. I am going to dry this with a heat tool a little bit, not completely. You don't need a heat tool. Just be careful if you are going to move this, that there is a lot of water on here, and if you like the way it looks, it will tip. Also, when you apply heat, it is going to move the water around a little bit. So just pre-prepared that that could happen so that you can understand what your results are going to be. This is going to dry a little lighter than what you're seeing now once the water has all evaporated. And then when I come back, I will show you the 3 different versions of the cardstock that I've done after they've all dried. So the papers are all dried. So this is the one that I walked you through, how I put it together. Isn't that pretty? You can see the shimmer. It's very pretty. This is another one that I had done earlier. And this is the 3rd sheet. So now that the backgrounds are all done, we need to trim these down to a workable size. Now I like to use rectangle dies with some sort of decorative edge to them, like these ones here have like a stitched border, or you can do one with a dot border or scallop or something like that. But if you don't have access to any of these, you can just trim them down with a paper trimmer. They're just gonna not have that element. There's nothing wrong with it. I did that for years, and the recipient of the card is going to love it just the same. So for this set here, which is from Little Inker, it's their stitched rectangles. Again, you don't have to use this if you've got one from Lawn Fawn or Simon Says Stamp or Hero Arts. Use what you have. I will be using this die here, which is 3 5/8 by 4 7/8. So if we were to look at a card, a standard card base, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, it's going to end up with a nice little border all the way around. So you can determine how you want to do it. You should be able to get at least 4. I think you get 4 out of each sheet. So we will end up doing 12 cards. So I'm going to go do this now. Just run it through your die cut machine, or like I said, if you don't have one, use a paper trimmer, and meet me back here and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so you should have 12 panels all cut out if you're following along exactly as I have been going. I'm just going to show you how different they look now that they are trimmed out to the size that we want. Aren't they pretty? And if there's still something in a particular piece that's not your favorite, so for instance, this little piece right here is not my favorite, we can position the stamps, which is what we're going to do next, in such a way to try and break that up a little bit. Just quickly flip through these. and then we'll talk about the next step. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, there are 4 variations to this card, and the first 2 steps are exactly the same as is the third. So we are going to do our stamping now. And so what do you need for this next step? Obviously you're going to need some sort of stamp. So I have 3 stamps here. I can't remember offhand who the manufacturer of these are. I will look it up and put it on the screen. They kind of have a collage mixed media look to them, which I think works really well with this kind of a background. And besides, I'm lazy, and this just gives me all of the look without any of the effort. So I've got Let It Snow, Christmas Reindeer, and Christmas Joy. Christmas Reindeer is my favorite. I like this one next, and then this last one is my least favorite of the 3, but I do like them all, right? So it's just, if I had to make a choice, that is what I am going to do. So I have 12 cards, so I'm going to do 4 of each. And for today's, for demonstrating, I am going to use the reindeer, and I will use the pieces that I started with, which are the 4 green pieces. Okay, so I will complete these cards and show them at the end, but this is what we're going to focus on today, or right now. So we are going to stamp on here, and we're going to stamp with Versamark, which is an embossing ink, or a really sticky ink. It doesn't have any color to it. It's clear. There are other things you can do with it, but for today we are going to use it for embossing. You will want to have some sort of embossing powder. I have gold embossing powder from Stampin' Up, but you can definitely use whatever you have. I did try it with white in my practice, and it was okay. I will show you what it looks like at the end. It was okay, but it wasn't sharp enough for me. And I also used Ranger Platinum, liquid platinum, because I couldn't decide between silver and gold, and even this one wasn't quite enough pop for me. So I did make a bunch with these, but I do prefer the gold. So that's what I'm going with. Obviously, whatever you like, go with it. Now, what I will say is I think you should go with an embossing powder that is going to solidly melt. So for instance, if you tried to use a glitter embossing powder, I don't think you'd be very happy with it, but you can try and see, and if you do, let me know in the comments below. I think a solid is what we want to go for. Another thing you're going to need is an embossing powder bag or powder tool, and you need a stamp block or stamp positioner. Now, because I'm mass producing these, I'm going to make 12, 4 of each. A stamp positioner such as the Misty works phenomenally well, but you can use a stamp block just as easily. So don't feel like you have to go out and get this. Let me position the stamp on the stamp positioner, and then I will show you how we're doing this step. So I have my stamp positioned. I have my cardstock in the bottom left corner, so this way I can just quickly swap them out. You know, I did look at the way the pattern was to figure out where I thought this would look well. You know, but you don't need to overthink it. Either which way is going to look pretty good. I centered it, or tried to center it as close as possible this way, and I did bring this down more towards the bottom. I don't want him look like he's floating in air. So I find that with critters and creatures and stuff like that, it works better if you kind of make them look like they're grounded. And the stamp set will help because of the way it's got these items around the bottom. It does make it look like he's standing on something. So the next step you want to do at this point is you want to take your embossing buddy or powder tool, and you just want to tap all over to make sure that when we stamp and apply the embossing powder, that it only goes where we want it to go. You will also need to have your embossing powder ready. Basically what's going to happen is we're going to ink, cover with embossing powder, and put it in a safe place. We'll heat them all up at the same time. Again, we're kind of in this mass producing mode. If you're only going to do one, of course, you're just going to go straight from stamping and covering it with embossing powder to heat setting it. I am also going to bring in a tray to collect the embossing powder. Now, I have my embossing powder in a little container. If I was just doing one, I would just basically hold the card over top of this and and make sure this collects. But because we're doing a lot and I just want to move quickly, I am going to use the tray. You can also use a coffee filter to act as a tray, or even a piece of 8.5 by 11 folded in half to act kind of as a catch-all, so that when you're finished you can easily dump it back into the container. So I'm just going to get this ready. I mean, you have to work fairly fast, but you don't have to work like super fast, if you get what I'm saying. So I think we're ready. First mark. Apply that to the stamp. Flip the lid. Give this some good pressure. Sorry for the shake. Because this is a fairly detailed stamp and I am stamping on watercolor paper, I am going to restamp. Now this is where the stamp platform really shines. Obviously, if you're doing this with just a regular block, you're probably better off not trying, because it would be very difficult to align it, especially as this is clear and you can't see where you already stamped. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, we're going to pull this off. We're going to pull the tray over. Got my embossing powder. I'm still going to do it over top of the container anyways. I'm so lazy. The less I have to clean up, the better. And that's what it looks like so far. So make sure when you put this aside that it's in a safe spot, because anything that touches this will brush that powder right off, and we don't want that. So we're going to do this for the other remaining cards that we have, okay? So I'm just going to do the 4 that we're focusing on today, and then I will come and show you the rest of the steps. But if you're going to do all 12, you can do this all right now for all 12. You don't need to stop after 4. Okay, I will be back once I have those all stamped. Okay, so I have all 4 panels ready to go. I'm going to use my heat tool to melt these. This was a Stampin' Up! Model. I think you can get a similar type of tool from Wagner, and I think Wagner is a brand, and I've seen Wow Embossing has their own tool as well. So these are pretty readily available. You do want to warm this up, so let this run for a few seconds beforehand. And it's not the quietest thing in the world, so I might just mute the sound for the next little bit while I am doing this. But basically you heat this up and you apply the heat to the panel. I like to hold it in the air, not on the table. Number one, I have a plastic covering on here. It will warp this. The other one is I think it goes faster when it's up, because it's only heating the paper, not also heating the table. So just some thoughts on how to emboss. So I'm going to turn this on, and I'm just going to do one panel right after the other. It's a little bit magical if you haven't seen this. Here we go. Okay, we now have 4 panels ready to proceed on to the next step, and this is where the Step It Up is going to happen. So at this point, it's all about assembly and how far you want to go in the assembly. So let me get some additional supplies and we'll move on to how to put these together from the easiest to the most glammed up version, okay? So for all the cards, you're obviously going to need a card base. I have 4 card bases here out of white cardstock. They were trimmed at 5.5 by 8.5 and then scored at 4 1/4. And obviously, because this is a landscape orientation, we're going to want it to go this way. So for the most simple version of this card, obviously you can just glue it straight down to the card base, but I think adding another element like foam tape or fun foam behind it, just to give it a little bit of dimension, will add that something special. So I would still go this extra step for the most basic model. I'm not going to use the fun foam because I need to use glue and stuff for that. So I'm just going to use my foam tape, and I'm going to apply this to the back. Take our card base, and we're just going to center this on the card. Just going to give that a good press. Okay, and that is our card. It is a very clean and simple card. I think any recipient would be happy to receive it. It's got some shine from the embossing as well as from the shimmer in the shimmer powder. Now, I'm not adding a sentiment to any of mine. You definitely could if you wanted to. I just think this is busy enough as it is and it doesn't need anything else. And I'm going to write a sentiment inside or stamp something inside here anyways. So that is card number 1. Let's step it up one more notch. For card number 2, need the card base. We are going to pull back our embossing powder and we're going to pull back the Versamark ink pad. And what we're going to do in this case is we're going to take the ink pad and we're just going to run it along the edge of the card here. So just like so. If you want a little bit of a thicker border, you can do it at a slight angle. We are not going for perfection. So I think it actually looks better when it looks like it's kind of been hand dipped. And so the line is not going to be very perfect. It's going to be a little bit raggedy, which I think looks really cool. It looks a little more organic. Okay, so once we've got ink on all 4 sides, we're just going to dip it in the embossing powder, tap off. For the longer side that doesn't fit in here, I'm just going to use the spoon to apply the powder. So now you can see what it looks like. Just a very hint of gold all the way around. And we're going to take the heat tool and we're going to heat that up just like we did before. There we go. Let me see if you can see it against the card. It's just a really subtle border, and you can see it's not even. I've got some thicker coverage here. It's a little bit thinner here and here, and I think that just looks really cool. So I'm going to do this on the other 2 cards for the next few steps, because of course each time we're building onto it. For this one, we're going to add the foam tape on the back and affix it to the card. So I'll show you that when that's done. Okay, so here's what this one looks like with just adding that embossed edge. Let's move on to the next step up. Okay, for the third stepped up card, we're going to introduce a solid piece of cardstock, and we're going to use this as a matting. Now, depending on what size you trim this out will determine what size you make this piece. So my original piece was 3 5/8 by 4 7/8. So I trimmed this piece to be 3 3/4 by 5 inches, and that is going to give a very small mat all the way around. So we're going to glue this down, and then we're going to apply the foam tape behind the green and then affix that to the card, and then this one will be done. I am applying a fair amount of glue because this is a little bit warped. Not too bad, but it is a little bit, so we want to make sure we have some good adhesion. This is Nuvo Deluxe Adhesive Clear Drying Craft Glue. It sets pretty quick. Another great glue that you can use is the Scotch Create Tacky Glue. That one's really good too. Okay, so I'm going to apply some foam tape and adhere this to the card, and I'll show you the finished results. So this is the third card. I really like the mat. I just think it makes the image pop perfectly. So now the last version, I'm going to assemble it just like this, and then I will come back and tell you what we're going to do next. So the last step is to add a little bling to the card, and you can do this a number of ways. I've got 5 different options in front of me, just as possible ways that you could go. So one of them is to use sequins. So I have some gold sequins. You don't have to do gold. You could do clear if you wanted to, or green. It's up to you what you like. I think the gold just kind of ties in with what's already in the card and doesn't distract from it, but that's my own thought. So this is a possible placement. Just watch. This is an animal. You don't want to place anything, I don't think, in this area where it can be perceived as something other than what you intended. I also had these crystal snowflakes that I thought might be kind of fun, and they're clear, so they're not going to be in your face, and I think I might actually use these more for the tree ones than the deer. I think that would be kind of fun. So again, it just adds a little bit of bling. I don't even know if you can see them. And just a little bit of bling and a little bit of texture. So those are that idea. If you don't have any embellishments like this, but let's say you have glitter paper and a punch, you could definitely punch out some snowflakes and add them. That would be kind of fun. These are those dewdrops. I thought they might be kind of fun too. Again, just adding a little bit of texture. You don't want to go overboard, but just a few here and there just to make things interesting, that looks like. And of course, there's always rhinestones. I have some sticky backed, or you could just use plain ones with glue. And of course, don't discount things like stickles or enamel dots or crystal drops from Tonic Studio. I think I'm going to go with the rhinestones. Let's see how that turns out. Okay, so there's my finished card. Let's bring them all back in so you can see all 4 of them. So I think all 4 cards work. It just depends on what you like and what kind of time you want to invest in them, because obviously each step adds an extra time commitment. And if you have to get a lot out, that's an important factor to keep in mind. I think my preference actually is the 3rd one. I think I prefer it without the bling. It just has a lot going on already with the gold embossing and the shimmer, but you know, for some people you can never have too much shine and sparkle. Let me know below what's your favorite. How far would you take it? Or would you take it even further? And if so, leave the suggestions down below. I hope you enjoyed this process of stepping up these cards, and until next time, happy crafting. Okay, so this is just a bit of a bonus for this video. I wanted to share with you some of the other cards that I had made kind of as a practice run before filming, and I just want to show a few things that I discovered along the way. So the paper I used here was from Royal Langnickel, I believe, something like that. And it's really textured, and it was very thin and very porous. Like, this paper warped like crazy, let me tell you. So I first tried it with that platinum, and you can see it's there, but it's not quite like as sharp as the gold. This is, and of course I'm showing you also the other stamps so you can see what they look like. And at this point, I was just experimenting with just putting the gold matte. I didn't do the other layers. I just wanted to see how this would work. So that was that one. This one was with the white, and it's okay, but because I have white in the background still, it kind of loses some of its image. It actually looks better in person than on video. And that's where I came up with the idea to matte the frame behind, just to give it a little bit of pop. I think the white works if you've got a darker background. So my backgrounds are fairly light with a lot of white in them, so that's why I opted against white. These ones are all done with gold, but I just wanted to show you the different variations you get with the different paper, as well as some of the other stamp sets. So I really liked how this one turned out. I love the way this is positioned. It kind of looks like he's stomping up the snow a little bit. At least that's what I tell myself. Here's that same card, but in gold. See how much better it stands out against the background? And this was on a pink one. Okay, that's it. Have a good week, you guys.